Forget about Missouri basketball getting the respect it deserves. I'm focused on the magic number 4.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And yes, while the next 2 spring games for Missouri football at least are canceled, what are we really missing out on? You tell me. But first, I'm going to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And a heck of a game last night for Missouri last night. The 4th time over 100 points for Missouri this year. A 101-71 victory over South Carolina. By the way, shout out to Fletcher, probably the youngest listener of this program that I have met so far out at a ball game. It was fun to talk to Fletcher there for just a little bit. But you know what was really fun for both of us was just getting to watch incredible offensive basketball by Missouri once again. That's really 2 games in a row at Mizzou Arena. You can't play much better offensively, quite honestly. Missouri arguably even played better. Obviously, Alabama a better opponent, but my goodness, when you shoot 64% from the field, 58% from the three-point line, and well over 80%, 83% to be exact, at the free throw line, throw in 7 turnovers, and a whole bunch of just absolutely beautiful assists by Missouri as well. I mean, South Carolina just simply had no chance in that ball game from the opening tip. If Missouri's going to play that good offensive basketball, well, there's few teams, frankly, in the entire country who can keep up with the Tigers. We're talking about top 5 absolute elite teams in the country. So here's the deal. There's still plenty of left for Missouri to play for, even though obviously winning the league is out of the question at this point. Even if Auburn loses its last 3 games, I suppose technically, hold on, I'd have to look at the standings. Regardless, we're just going to put that aside here for a second. I'm fairly certain that Missouri's chances, having lost to Auburn already, are 0 to win the league. But regardless, really the number you want to focus on here, in my opinion, if you're a Missouri fan, is 4. In other words, a 4 seed, not only in the Big Dance, but also the SEC tournament as well. You want to get that double bye in the SEC tournament for obvious reasons. Obviously, I don't want to play 4 games in 4 days, potentially, if you're Missouri. So let's scratch that 1 game off of the schedule, first of all. You know, again, I don't know how much the SEC tournament is going to actually matter in terms of seeding this year. It didn't matter a whole lot last season, it would seem. So we'll just have to see in the future. But the point is, that's going to help your March Madness resume, obviously. And I, for one, call me old school, I still wouldn't mind hanging a banner at Mizzou Arena that says SEC Tournament Champions. Those banners do indeed hang in the rafters forever. So that would be worth a lot to me. But on March Madness, of course, the more important tournament, the most important tournament of all, I think a 4 there is really important as well. I think a 1 seed, I would say, is completely off of the table at this point for Missouri. A 2 seed is probably a long shot. But really, I think a 2, a 3, a 4 seed, historically, there's not a gigantic difference there, in my opinion. And in fact, I think sometimes, depending on how the brackets play out, depending on how the draw, the luck of the draw to some extent, depending on where you're seated, well, sometimes a 3 seed can actually be more desirable than a 2 seed, for example. So to me, as long as Missouri gets a 4, at least a 4 seed in March Madness, famously the 5 versus 12, there's almost always at least one 12 seed beating a 5 seed in the first round over the last 20, 25 years or so, maybe even 30 years. I would like to avoid that particular line. As long as Missouri avoids that, I think we should be in pretty good shape in the first round. So having said all that, with just 3 games to play here, Missouri a couple games on the road, and Missouri tied for 4th place currently with Tennessee, just 1 game behind Florida for 3rd place, who lost to Georgia last night. Texas A&M, by the way, just a half a game behind the Tigers. They play Vanderbilt at home tonight. So, again, those are the 3 teams that Missouri fans should be rooting against here for the final week and a half, more than likely. Florida, Tennessee, and Texas A&M. That's who you really want to watch if you're a Tiger fan. And something I've discussed here lately, I think that Trent Pierce and Anthony Robinson, maybe even particularly Anthony Robinson, the 2 Missouri sophomores, have almost become a barometer for this team, in my opinion. It was beautiful to see Anthony Robinson hitting those pull-up mid-range jump shots again from the elbow. That's something I've harped on a lot on this program, just because I think that can be a really effective weapon for Robinson, and especially, and by the way, I should say, speaking of effective weapons, suddenly Trent Pierce whipping the ball from the corner under the basket to Mark Mitchell has become one of Missouri's best actions here over the last few games. And also on Anthony Robinson, Dennis Gates says, "You saw Anthony Robinson playing as free as you've seen him. He tries to be too perfect." And an indicator of that is kind of shooting mid-range, jump shots, step-back threes, and then doing a little dance afterwards. That's how you know he's having fun. And Gates would sort of go on to expand a little bit on his perfect comment there. He said that's something he tells the entire team, the idea that, hey, guys, I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to be excellent. And the 2 guys there, Caleb Grill and Anthony Robinson, both responded with, hey, like he says, I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to be what? They both said, excellent. Again, right in sync. So this team very much in sync, and they're obviously getting the message from Dennis Gates. And not only was Missouri's shooting on point yesterday, but I thought overall the passing in general was just tremendous by the Tigers. In particular, previously Peyton Marshall's backdoor pass against Kansas was probably my favorite pass of the season so far, but it was another big guy yesterday, Josh Gray, with a backdoor pass to Caleb Grill that was an even higher level of difficulty for sure. Gray puts it quite a ways out in front of Grill, but almost put some backspin on it or something. Whatever the touch that Gray did there, it couldn't have been more perfect. I mean, I almost didn't know that Josh Gray had that in his bag. What an absolutely beautiful play by Gray on that connection with Caleb Grill. By the way, speaking of something beautiful, Jacob Cruz, well, his first 2 shots looked pretty confident, huh? Here's a young man who started off the season slowly. Boy, the last month or so has been a huge contributor for Missouri. And in fact, in the past month, Cruz, 14 of his past 28 from the 3-point line. By the way, Cruz, who started off his career in junior college, is it possible he is subject to the Diego Pavia rule, the Vanderbilt quarterback who successfully won his suit against the NCAA saying, hey, junior college, that shouldn't count against my eligibility. Hey, if you're Jacob Cruz, it could potentially make some sense there to come back, pay some bills as the young married father that he is. Certainly, if that's a possibility, you bring him back if you're Missouri based on how he's playing right now. There aren't a ton of guys out there at his size who can shoot like he can. Another year under the belt with Dennis Gates. Again, some big leaps I'm making here. Mostly, I just want to ask the question, is that a possibility? Are we making too many assumptions there with with Jacob Cruz eligibility? I don't know. We'll find out here in a few weeks when the basketball portal opens. That's for sure. And you know what? As great as this Missouri team has been this season, There are some paranoid Missouri fans that think it's far too early still to even breathe the words Final Four. So let's talk about that in just a minute. First, but when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, it's easy to place live bets all games, even if you miss the start of the game or you want to just bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, well, combine your live bets into a same game parlay as well. I just love this live betting feature. Just keeps you right in the game. Heck, you can be watching a Mizzou game and think, hey, I think Missouri's going to settle for the field goal here. Bet on that kind of stuff. If you think you can get inside the head of Eli Drinkwitz, you may just have an edge. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So YouTube viewer Alpha Kappa Lambda 1992 says, can we please not mention Final Four? Coming into the season, I thought if we were a bubble team and developed the young players, the season would be a success. If we make the Sweet 16, the season will be a massive success. Well, first of all, my mention of the Final Four, just so we're all clear here, I wasn't saying that, hey, Missouri's definitely going or anything like that. First of all. Second of all, I do think this team is good enough to get there. That doesn't mean they necessarily will, of course. I'm just saying there is a path in which it could happen. I think on Missouri's best nights, they can beat anybody. That seems to be conventional wisdom at this point, by the way. And really, I think when you say, hey, if we make the Sweet 16, it'll be a massive success, I already think this season is a massive success, almost no matter what happens the rest of the season. Heck, Missouri could lose its final 4 games and still would be 10-8 in the conference with 1 loss in the SEC tournament. You're still looking at a 7 seed probably there, maybe 8 seed at worst. 10-8 in the SEC before the season. Would I have taken that? You're darn right I would have. Especially in this league, that's a surefire March Madness bid. So to me, I have to laugh at this kind of stuff because, guys, I know I'm the #1 Mizzou podcaster on YouTube and audio, I assume, as well. Those numbers are out there in public. Go ahead and check on them if you want to. But I promise, I do not have as much power as some of you think that I do. Me just saying the words Final Four is not going to jinx Missouri. In fact, hey, KAL 1992, you said Sweet 16. So if Missouri loses in the second round, does that mean we both jinxed them? Guys, take a breath. We can say words. I'm not even on the team. And on my previous program, I mentioned that it would seem, at least, it's, again, seem being the operative word there, that Luther Burden III's draft stock could be dropping a little bit. This is the perception being put out there by, well, Mel Kiper Jr. and Field Yates over at ESPN anyway. And for a bunch of reasons I laid out yesterday, I'm not sure I'm totally buying into this narrative. But some Missouri fans think there is good reason for all of this. Jacob says, in 2024, the more consistent week-to-week player was Theo Weiss. Burden was not himself. Blame it on Cook, blame it on play calls, blame it on defenses playing him, blame it on whatever. Bottom line is he wasn't what he was in 2023. His sideline shenanigans are going to land him in the same group as George Pickens. A lot of teams were iffy drafting him because of that. Well, first of all, nobody is a bigger Theo Weiss fan than me, I don't think. And I will say it's interesting you bring up Theo Weiss because early in 2023, I kept telling people when Theo Weiss wasn't necessarily putting up big numbers yet for Missouri in the first half of the season, I kept going, just wait, because this guy is getting open consistently. And the point here is that, yes, when you're a wide receiver, context matters a heck of a lot. So while some people just want to seemingly hand wave the context of all the numbers of all these fantasy stats that receivers put up, well, context is sometimes everything. But putting aside the actual on-the-field evaluation for a second, I think calling him, comparing him to George Pickens, well, first of all, in terms of talent, hey, I'll be compared to George Pickens any day of the week. But to your point on these sideline shenanigans, I just wouldn't put Burden in the same category as Pickens, simply because, listen, I don't know the Pickens situation up, down, and backwards or anything, but it seems like I've heard more than one blow-up involving George Pickens. Maybe he's just generally kind of a difficult person to deal with. Whereas with Luther Burden, the sideline shenanigans I assume you're referring to, well, it's got to be Texas A&M, right? Because in that game, I was as big a critic as Burden's, his body language, his negative body language after Missouri got down multiple possessions early in that football game. I hated Luther Burden's body language in that game. But I also told everybody that I thought that was an out-of-character moment for him. I think he has been a good teammate and a pretty easy guy to deal with for the most part, especially for a guy who is a superstar type of player. Based on everything I've seen, and again, just like with George Pickens, I'm not exactly inside the Missouri locker room or anything like that, but, from a distance, I follow this team about as closely as anybody. I've just never gotten the idea that Luther Burden is some diva wide receiver that you have to handle with kid gloves or anything like that. Again, everyone is entitled, I shouldn't say entitled, but I'm willing to forgive people who have a bad day or a bad moment, because Lord knows I've certainly had my fair share on occasion. I can definitely be an emotional guy in a competitive situation or just a normal everyday situation on occasion as well. So to me, I think that was more of a learning experience for Luther Burden than anything, and not really a sign of something that I would be terribly worried about. I think when NFL teams at the combine and other opportunities get to talk to Luther Burden, I think a lot of those concerns are going to be dampened quite a bit. And also, again, with George Pickens, it wasn't just about the off-the-field stuff. On the field, George Pickens suffered a very serious knee injury in the cocktail party game, I believe, the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville. So injury was a huge reason why there were questions in the NFL with Pickens. Everything as much to do with that as anything with his character or personality, whatever way you want to put that. So Burden, no real injury concerns here. And to me, any personality concerns there, I mean, listen, NFL players, alpha males, occasionally they're a little bit tough to deal with, but occasionally they have an emotional response. Okay, let's have some realistic expectations here. Overall, it just doesn't seem to me that Burden is going to be that big of an issue for a team. And with the Mizzou spring game off for at least the next 2 seasons, I got to ask, what are we really missing? Let's talk about that after these quick words. One thing the last few years of this podcast has taught me that if I put out something that Mizzou doesn't like in public, specifically something that they want to deny, well, they'll do it. They absolutely will back channel it at the very least to people on the beat and say, hey, that's not it. That's not right. Well, I'll say this. I put out RIP Black and Gold game a couple days ago, and nobody at Mizzou has denied that the spring game is dead, by the way. I do think that is somewhat notable, especially since all practices at this point are closed to the public this spring as well. And I'll just say I'm a little bit tired of being treated like an infant. If Missouri had simply just said, hey, we'll think this is to our competitive advantage if basically we close all practices, don't have an open spring game, all that kind of stuff, Well, we could argue about whether that's true or not, but I would at least appreciate the honesty. But maybe more to the point. As much as having said all of that, does this really matter though? Because honestly, are spring games actually fun? Not really, would be my answer. A couple years ago, I'll say 3 years ago, 2022, it was fun to see Cody Schrader emerge in that spring game before he played his first game with the Tigers. But more often than not, what are you really learning from these particular spring games? The only thing I can ever remember learning is that, hey, this Cody Schrader kid looks pretty good. And even from that, it wasn't though I was predicting a 1,500-yard junior season and top 10 in the Heisman or anything like that. And especially in 2024, the latest spring game where there was no live tackling, what could I have possibly learned from any of that this past season? I feel like I learned nothing predictive or of value in this game. So if you're a Missouri fan that is disappointed here, you like the event, you like an excuse to tailgate, hey, nothing wrong with that. But if all we're looking for is an excuse to tailgate an event, something like that, maybe this just needs to be rethought of. Maybe there needs to be a spring meet the team, get some autographs day, something like that, where you are connecting with your fan base, you're giving people an event, a reason to stay engaged with the program, and yet no state secrets, I'm using that very sarcastically, by the way, but no state secrets being leaked out, no opportunities for the Lane Kiffins of the world to vulture your players in the transfer portal, whatever the paranoia is there. I just think there's got to be something there for spring football, just an event. It doesn't necessarily have to be a scrimmage or live tackling even, but hey, meet the players, autographs, something. Somebody out there is a better marketer than I am, can surely come up with something. And speaking of the fans, another really impressive crowd last night at Mizzou Arena. I would say at least 12 to 13,000 in there from what I could see. So obviously not quite as big and raucous as the Alabama crowd, but not too far off either, especially, again, a Wednesday, midweek. Well, Tuesday, regardless, a midweek game, 8 o'clock. Not an ideal timing for most people. So just a really impressive showing by Missouri fans. But I will say this, I was a little bit disappointed, and maybe I'm taking this too seriously, but I thought some Missouri fans took the Jordan Butler thing maybe a little bit too seriously. I mean, honestly, why boo Jordan Butler? I didn't totally understand that. It's not like he's Ryan Robertson or something, the former Kansas Jayhawk who is from the St. Louis area and decided, the heck with Missouri, I'm going to go play for Kansas. If you want to boo him, fine and dandy. I feel like you almost got to see that coming if you're Ryan Robertson, that type of deal. Even Trevin Brazil, who went out of his way to badmouth Missouri on social media, by all means, he can take some boo birds. But Butler, what did he really do other than decide that he wanted to go back home? I just didn't really think that was necessary. Now, again, if you're a young man like Fletcher or Eli out there, some of my younger listeners, and you're having some fun at Jordan Butler's expense, I can't say I blame you. But when you start hearing reports that there are like older guys at mid-court who are giving Jordan Butler the business, I don't know. That's kind of where I draw the line there. I think you're maybe working yourself into a shoot just a tiny bit there as an older fan. And again, as a fan, why should I feel spurned by Jordan Butler when, quite honestly, if the trade there, for all intents and purposes, was Butler for Josh Gray, well, I think we love what we've gotten out of Josh Gray this season. Big fan of his personality, glad he's on the team. I just don't see any reason to be bitter there whatsoever. And while Tamar Bates seemed to have some choice looks for Butler during the game, it felt like after the game things were, all good. Certainly Dennis Gates said after the game, I love Jordan. He just wanted to get back home. So from my perspective, no hard feelings there whatsoever. And frankly, if some of you are just having fun and, whatever, I get it. Just I look at it a little bit differently the older I get here now, as I get into middle age, and somebody like Jordan Butler is now young enough to be my son at this point. So forgive me if you're younger and you're like, you're taking it too seriously. Maybe you're right from that perspective. But I'll say this from my perspective. Thanks as always to you for listening to Locked On Mizzou. And for your next listen, check out Locked On College Basketball. Get the jump on all your friends for your March Madness brackets. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, until next time, I'll be back with you tomorrow on the SEC squad. It was a really fun show. I got to say, I got some quality zingers in this week, I felt like. A really fun appearance, as always, and I'll be back with my usual Locked On Mizzou on Friday. See you then.